Oh, I love it. I think we're live. Not just one platform, but actually 4 platforms today.
If you want to share your location where you are dialing or calling in or watching the webinar from, that's always a nice experience to see.
Idaho in the US, Sheffield, Dubai, Kenya, Bulgaria, Philippines, Malaysia. Wow, you guys are from everywhere.
Getting late
and getting early some places.
We're keeping people from sleeping.
Right, but it's such an exciting topic, so what can you do?
100%. Oh, I love it. Okay, lots more joining us. Okay, so we've got 2 minutes to go before we officially kick off, but we're welcoming people from everywhere from now, Indonesia, Canada, Ukraine, Sheffield, Portugal, Florida, Mauritius. Wow, everywhere. Thanks for joining us. We've got an exciting event talking about IDS and how the integration between Plannerly and Graphisoft's Archicad can do you some wonders in setting up more integrated BIM management, BIM working practices. Really excited about this one. We're streaming live, not only here, but also on YouTube Live, on Facebook Live, and also on LinkedIn Live. If you're live, you'll also be able to access the Q&A and a poll. We've got 3 questions for you. We try to make them a little bit fun as well. So how do you introduce yourself? How do you get involved in this fun workflow? And how do you set requirements, create the models and check the models in your projects today? We will go through those, but I'll quickly flash them up on screen. So they are the answers as we go through for how do you introduce yourself, and then how do you get involved in this fun workflow, and also how do you set the requirements there. Nobody runs away and hides when the model checking starts at the moment. So all good. We've got the right people in the right place. Cool. Okay, so we've hit the hour. Let's get started. Gosh.
Hey, this is Akash.
I'm Clive.
Happy to be here with you. My name is Zoli.
And I'm Sabi.
Cool. And today we're going to be talking about how IDS helps us in the workflow that connects a lot of tools. And today we'll be talking about how to create IDS, which are Information Delivery Specifications in Plannerly, and using those in Graphisoft Archicad. The workflow, this IDS workflow, is really cool because it enables us to define requirements in a machine-readable way that can be creating a file that can then be exported from one tool and used in another tool. And in this example, we can see use of that set of IDS requirements in Graphisoft Archicad, and then also back as a round trip inside of Plannerly. So the sort of zoomed in view inside of Plannerly, we can use templates to create requirements in both a visual, human readable, and also a machine readable form. When we export those requirements, this IDS file is created. And then inside of Archicad, we can grab the file and then import it. And when you import that file, you are essentially creating a whole set of properties and mapping those properties, and you are making them available to the modeling team along with the standard set of requirements and rules. And then when you're checking that model, you can visually see whether those elements are meeting the requirements, either in yellow, green, or in red. In this case, some of them, these 4, are not meeting requirements. And so that really simple workflow of defining requirements, using those requirements, and checking those requirements are what we are going to go through today. We're going to have an agenda of an introduction quickly to IDS. We're going to see how, in detail, how you create, how you use, and then how you check. And then we'll have most of the time will be spent on a live demonstration of the tools that we've just introduced. So let's set the scene and see why. Why is this information delivery specification important to our information management project managers, BIM managers around the world? Well, today we have lots of different ways of defining requirements, and sometimes we can be pretty flexible in the way that they're defined in lots of spreadsheets. Spreadsheets are fantastic tools to create and share information, a lot more flexibility maybe than is needed for this type of approach. And with that flexibility creates confusion and misinterpretation. And unfortunately, a lot of challenges when going through that use of the information required and the checking of information required. So the Open BIM workflow from buildingSMART is where hopefully we can really resolve some of those challenges. It can start from a set of dictionaries. So the buildingSMART data dictionaries are available to make sure we're talking all the same language. We are able to then define a set of requirements in a structured format that can then be used to create a model. And then hopefully it can be used by the team creating the model to even check the model before it's delivered. If there are issues that are falling out of that, then there's a fixes with BCF workflow. This side on the left-hand side is more proactive. It's about setting the standards and running checks and hopefully being able to define things in a way that everyone can fulfill those requirements without having the issues in a reactive form. This will be obviously required for coordination, but if we've got really structured information requirements along with the validation rules, we can do a lot more automation, a lot more proactive steps in that workflow. So we end up in this seamless workflow with a human-friendly way of understanding that set of information requirements. We see a computer interpretable set of requirements to understand the applicability and the criteria and essentially what those checks are going to be run. And then we also have an automated way, because everyone, not only just humans, but also machines, can understand. They can go through and check those models. So everything would be a lot more integrated, a lot more fun, a lot less waste, a lot less rework in that workflow. So let's talk quickly about how to create. And I mentioned that most of this is going to be a live demonstration, so we'll get out of slides pretty quickly. But the first step in creating an IDS is, we mentioned, to select your dictionaries. So here is the example in Plannerly. You're selecting your classification and your properties domains. You're starting to use them when you type. And as you type into the cell, you'll be able to select here retaining walls as a specific entity, the IFC wall type. And then once you've defined an entity and you're saying, I need it at this point in time, we're then able to search the buildingSMART data dictionary for specific properties, their groups or their p-sets, and then also being able to define rules to say this must be a number, it must be true, false, it must run this specific regex expression to check it. And once you've done that a few times, you'll end up with a way of defining that in a repeatable way for all of your different systems and different elements that you're working on. And as you've done that, you can, with parts of that defined set of requirements, create an IDS, and that is simply shared either with a link or downloaded and sent to somebody else. And that IDS file is then used in the downstream workflow. So pretty quick to create. If you've done it before, it's reusable and you're defining these as sets of requirements. Let's understand more about what that next step is. How do you then use the IDS in Archicad?
Yes, so we just got an IDS file from Clive, and we are ready to consume. Generally, in the previous workflows, you get it in a spreadsheet, you get it in a PDF, you get it in different ways, and you started preparing your models, creating the properties, the classifications, started mapping out things in order to help the teams create the templates for them. This is a really manual work in a lot of cases, takes a lot of time and super error prone, because if you have thousands of, hopefully thousands, but even if it's hundreds of properties and classifications, there's a lot that can go south. And we try to optimize this workflow, especially in the beginning, for preparing the templates, preparing for the projects, and have a better and smoother takeoff for your teams. So within Archicad, we are able to import an IDS file created by any IDS provider. And in this case, you will see that Plannerly will provide us a really nice IDS file, and we are going to go through in a live demo in a few minutes how is it going to happen. Also, what happens in Archicad is we are populating automatically classifications and properties. So this is really important, that you don't need to manually input those data anymore, because this is going to be picked automatically. Of course, you have some control over that. And whenever you're ready with the modeling and you prepared your model, you need to still export an IFC file, because at the end, when the validation is going to happen, an IFC file will be validated against the IDS file and a platform. So we still need the IFC output, which incorporates all the data that you've inserted in according to the IDS, and then the validation platform will show you the red, green, and yellow check marks if you did a great job or not. From this point, just a couple of technicalities, and also in written, just to avoid confusion. IDS 1.0 files are now accepted by Archicad. We effortlessly automate classifications and property. You will see it's super speed, light speed for those populations. And don't forget that IFC is still needed for validation. And we are done, right?
Exactly. Yep. And then in that last step, we're then checking against the IDS that's been created. So this example shows where the file has been imported into Plannerly, and then you can see the tasks down the left-hand side and down to those requirements that have not been met. And you can isolate and start to interrogate and then report out the problems to the teams that need to fix them. So some things that maybe have requirements, some things have requirements and the correct properties, and some are missing the properties entirely. That's the color coding that we see inside of the viewing here. So let's turn our focus to a live demo. As we start to transition to the live demo, I'll remind you that there are some polls. How do you introduce yourself? How do you get involved in this fun workflow? And also, how do you check? Oh, we have 7% of the audience that are running away and hiding when the model checking starts. I love it. Thanks for your honesty. Hopefully we make that process a lot easier. So let's switch to Akosh's screen and share the starting point for using Plannerly to create an IDS.
Awesome, thank you. So we just jumped into Plannerly, and what I'm going to do now is I'm just creating a new project from scratch. So really see this entire process. I'm just going to call it an office and create a new project. When you start a new project, you will be put into a separate area, some other use cases of Plannerly. You might want to create some other documentation like an OIR, PIR, EIR, BEP, you name it, you can create here a collaborative way of agreement creation based on templates. So a very quick and a very reliable way of getting to agreements with your collaborators. But let's go even deeper in the topic. I'm switching to the scope module where I can create an IDS, an information delivery specification, which I could do from scratch as well. But I'm planning to use a template instead. So I'm opening up an office building, which you will see has just a few elements that I want to request and send it over to Archicad to start creating some modeled elements from. So what if I add an air terminal, for example? And you will see that now I have a purpose. I have a purpose for exchanging information. I will need an air terminal, and I'm expecting to have extended warranty, yes or no, true or false value added into that property. If I turn on a couple of other things like classification codes, entity types, you will start seeing that this requirement is going to be applied to IFC air terminals. It's going to be applied to a certain classification code, in this example, in a uniclass classification structure. Let me just add a little bit more so we have something to transfer over. So I start having not only the air terminals, but gypsum boards where I would be interested in seeing carbon content with any kind of value added, or concrete solid slabs. In this case, for the information exchange, I'm interested in the fire rating, which has to be one of these values defined, or thermal conductivity. So again, one of these values between certain ranges, I'm expecting a number. So these pieces of information requirements are coming from my project. This is what you've seen in the presentation slides as well. You can define information requirements. Adding new information requirements can also come from the buildingSMART data dictionary. So just by searching the dictionary, you will find the relevant and reliable and following the standard kind of information, and then requesting the right values. In the example, choosing one of the values, choosing true or false, choosing a range of values, but even going as far as using AI to define the set of rules that you are interested in. So once you define these information requirements are added to your information delivery specification. And as we know, as buildingSMART defined it, information delivery specification should have a human-readable format. This is a beautiful human-readable format which could be sent out into PDF, which you could even contract for using e-signatures. But it also goes out into a machine-readable format, which is the topic of today, the IDS XML. So just going to exporting the file, choosing one of the options, going for the IDS specification, of course, I would be able then to filter, to do a couple of custom settings. But in this example, I'm just going to create my IDS as quickly as possible. So that's already done, actually. So after having the human-readable format of my IDS, now I'm also having the machine-readable format of it. So something to hand over to the guys at Archicad.
We don't see it on your screen. Did you open it?
Absolutely. Now you should see it.
Okay. Yep, yeah. You shared another tab. Yep. Great. Perfect. So let's switch over to see what happens next on, we're switching to Zoli.
Archicad side.
And Archicad. Yeah. Show us what's going on the Archicad side.
Thank you, Akosh, for the great requirement file. I've already downloaded it. And here we are at our starting state with one of our sample files already loaded. And just for the sake of transparency, I want to show you that we have completely eliminated all properties from the project. So we start with a clean slate just to see what happens. The property manager doesn't contain any properties, and also the classification manager only contains the built-in classifications. So we've emptied it out just to better be able to show you what happens. And the first step that we are going to do is import the requirement file that Akosh just created. And immediately we can see that all referenced requirement properties from that file are parsed, and all classifications that Ákos described in the requirements are already read. And after selecting what we want to actually import here, we can also select an IFC property mapping, because importing data from IDS in Archicad doesn't just natively create the available properties and classifications. We automatically create the required IFC property mapping as well. So you can export your IFC right out of the box without having to do any additional troublesome IFC mapping later on. So after hitting import, and as you can see, it's a fairly fast process, I will once again double check that all properties from the requirements file are already available for use in Archicad. This means not only the property names, but for example, where option sets are available, even the predefined possible values are imported with some kind of additional informations. And of course, not just the properties, but the additional classifications also appeared. What I just mentioned earlier, that if we are checking the IFC property mapping, then you will see that we have not just created the native Archicad data, but we also created the respective IFC mapping so that these properties will get their values from the proper property based on the proper classification from Archicad. So you don't really have to do these type of mappings manually. Okay, so what happens next? I've received requirements. I know what I have to do with them. Let's see how this can benefit us in actually fulfilling those requirements in the project. I have predefined some selection sets, so it will be easier. Let's just try and select all the airflow terminals in Archicad. And let's do a quick setting. Just a second. Yes, let's just do a quick setting. So I'm going to put the air terminals to their proper classification. The air terminals required an extended warranty property, which I will set to true for all of them. So basically, we can say that with these settings, all air terminal requirements will be fulfilled when we export the IFC. The same goes, for example, for wall finishes. Let me just get the entire model back before selection. This is the magic of doing an actual live demo on a complete project. You have to wait those 2 or 3 seconds. So we see that we have 178 wall finishes. And let me just manually deselect a couple of them. So at the end, when we will be checking the results, we also want to see some missing items to better show you how the missing data will look like in Plannerly. So we are going to do the same thing for these walls. I will set their proper classification and I will set their carbon content property to a proper value. So bear in mind here that all 174 walls now fulfill the requirements out besides those 4 that don't. And for the last requirement, let me just once again switch back to the full model and switch to our last selection set. And for the structural slabs, we are once again setting the proper classification. And we had 2 requirements for these. One was that they absolutely need a fire rating. We are going to set it to 90 minutes for all of them. And they also require a thermal conductivity property, which we are going to set to 0.04. And let me just point out here that the reason why I've set it to 0.04 is you will see after checking the model that even though the property is filled and fulfills the requirement, but the requirement, as Ákos said, also has some limitations and some additional information, like the property has to fit between specific values. And I've intentionally put these out of these value range. So we also have warning types after the checking. And yes, so basically this is how the generated data helps us to easily enrich our project with the needed information. And all we have to do at the end, and I know I'm saying this with a lot of ease, All we have to do is save an IFC. This is usually the longer part. For this project, in this specific case, we can even wait if you are willing to live up for the live demo. And yes, Ákos, once it's done, uploading to Plannerly, and you can take it over for checking.
Perfect. And so as we switch over to Aki's screen, there are some questions that are in the audience tab. If you can move them to the Q&A so that we can go through them more easily, that would be great. And to your point there, Zoli, OMG, this is going to be so much easier is sort of a quote that has been popped up in the audience panel. So
happy to hear it.
Oh, okay. So we'll switch over to Ákos. You're going to take us through what happens when you have the model. So when we've got that IFC file.
Right. So I just happened to receive the model, the same IFC file. And you see a couple of percentages appearing, a couple of colors. So let me walk you through what we see. And actually, Zoli had to make a good job because this IDS process is so simple that with the predefined values that actually intentionally Zoli had to put a couple of issues in here so we can actually see some color. So as I click through these images, you will see how the different pieces of geometry is being isolated. If you really want to understand what the percentages mean, I can see now that I have 12 pieces of slabs, for example. I should probably show that. And fire rating seems to be green, which means that I do have the properties are in the right preset. The values are according to my expectations. So remember, we were saying that it has to be 30, 60, 90, or 120 minutes fire rating. And if value or unit would be applicable, which in this case not, but we are even checking that the unit is good. Of course, it makes a difference if we are talking about kilometers or miles, so we do want to check those as well. So that's the green color. If I see an orange color, it would mean that I have the property, I have the right P-sets as well, but the value is outside of my expectations. So in this case, that's what Zoli pointed out, intentionally put 0.4, if I'm not mistaken, to these elements, so we can see what is wrong, what is the orange, the meaning of the orange color. Then we have some air terminals, seems to be fine, nothing to do there, 150 pieces of them, extended warranty, true or false value has been added. So as well, I might just want to verify that this task has been completed, take it out from the picture. And then I have the gypsum walls, and I can see that in 4 instances, these gypsum walls have some problems, and these problems are shown as red. So that can only mean that I'm even missing the property, or the property might be put into a wrong P-set. Anyways, there is some actionable items to do with this one. In this case, what I could do actually is maybe involve Zoli again and say that, Zoli, please don't forget to add these properties.
And I won't.
And you won't.
Next time.
But you are now notified about the activity to be done and can take it over from here. So now, actually, what I can also do is maybe set the status to a QA fix, so I can also show you how it looks in a bigger picture. So switching my verify module from the model viewer to a cardboard, to a Kanban board, you can see now that there are some tasks which are passing all the steps that define stepping or steps in quality assurance and all the different process steps. Unfortunately, there is something that falls into a QA fix, which and some other items which are still in the making. So very quick overview of this part of it. And until I have the screen, I also want to show you something else as well, because we were now experimenting with a small example with 3 elements only. But what happens on a real project, how it looks on a big project. So I prepared the big project for you as well. In this case, multiple milestones, a larger responsibility matrix. So now we can really communicate the needs of a project. Also talking about responsibilities. So first, finding out what is the purpose of model creation, because for each and every purpose, we might have to model differently. We might need different pieces of information. And for each and every milestone, we might have different companies, different teams, different people involved. So there is also not only responsibilities, but these shifts of responsibilities that we have to communicate in order to avoid overlapping responsibilities, for example, and models. So in this example, you see that maybe the architect started, then handed over to the structural designer, and in the end, the contractor would be the one who installs these supports and has the most information about it. Opening up these line items will have or give us access to the information requirements, which you can see might be developing over time, might be becoming more and more. And at a certain point, it might happen also that you are actually decreasing the geometrical needs as well as introducing and decreasing different information needs. So at this point, what I can also do, I can create my IDS, of course, my Information Delivery Specification. And creating that would also allow me to not having to create this huge, massive amount of information, but looking into, for example, themes only, saying that I only want to have the architectural responsibilities. I'm only interested in the coordination use case, and that would be the IDS for an architect, for example. So of course, this is now contractual. This is something that could be followed, and as we've seen, imported into Archicad to execute. And another example, if you just really want to see a massive piece of information, is what if you just don't apply any filters, just choose one of the milestones, because we are going to create the IDS purpose by purpose. So creating a cost estimation and an IDS all file, for example, which is now containing everything, downloading and showing you on the screen, not forgetting to switch maybe screens and showing this tab now. You will see a massive amount of data put into the IDS file and being handed over to the guys again to execute in Archicad.
Cool. So, and then we switch over to Zolly to see that imported?
For a couple more seconds, if you can build, if you can still keep looking at Archicad, then I'll show you. So this is the same instance that we've used before with those 4 imported. And just to show you, this is the IDS Ákos was speaking. So it's like a 10,000 line of requirements. And the same process, IDS import, we are selecting that one, and you can see all the data that is coming from the file. You can even create a new mapping if you don't want to bother editing your old IFC mappings, then you can instantly create a new one. You can see all the classifications that are coming from it, and the import will be just as fast as earlier, maybe a second more, but the amount of data that is generated that you'd otherwise have to create manually based on spreadsheets or PDFs is just there at your availability. So that's it from my end. This was just to showcase not only how you use it mid-project, but maybe how you start a project or set up a template for your architects for every data to be available instantly.
Very cool. Very cool. So that was great. We saw in the live demo the workflow from creating to using it to complement the model that was being created and actually fill in things. And it was great to see that you actually had to make a problem rather than just follow the workflows, so that we could show in the demo how the exceptions would be shown as well. Thanks, guys. So we covered today, what did we learn? We understood a little bit more about IDS. It's not just an overly flexible spreadsheet that can potentially get us in trouble. It's an XML, a schema, a structure that really follows a very well-defined hierarchy of requirements, and it's being defined and curated by that standard by buildingSMART, so we can all really enjoy some standardization there. It's really useful to create requirements and get people that are signed up for those requirements in a contract. We can show you how inside of Plannerly in another demo of how that gets into a human readable contract with an e-signature for your smart contract as well. And then that file is then used to create the model and is used to make sure that the data that's being added to the model meets the requirements that have been set. And then we can import that into a checking side. We use Plannerly there, but there are many other tools to do the checking side as well, and being able to check whether the model meets those requirements of that workflow. We're really, really pleased to be able to share this with you guys. All of our contact details are on this slide here. So if you want to get in touch with us individually, you can. We would love to hear your thoughts. We'd love to hear your suggestions as we develop this and really start to build a more collaborative, integrated, more structured connection between our different tools in the AEC space. Thanks so much for your time, everyone. Thanks for sticking around. Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.